Welcome to Super Games Buster, where it takes 5 million years to put up one episode. Today we're going to be looking at Splatterhouse for the Xbox 360. Now, my friends at this point call this the reason why I never update this channel. I call this game the place where fun goes to die. Now, why does fun go to die here? Well, a number of reasons actually, but first let's start with the basics. Splatterhouse is a 3D beat-em-up developed by Namco Bandai Games. It was made for the Xbox 360 and PS3, and it was released on November 23rd, 2010 in North America, and November 26th of the same year in Europe. The game is supposed to be a reboot of the original Splatterhouse for the TurboGrafx 16, and while I haven't actually played the original game before this review, I do remember there being a lot of hype for this remake when it was coming out. Like, there were a whole bunch of videos with the developers of the game at Namco Bandai that were just them talking about how they were taking care to bring Splatterhouse back in a big way, how they just wanted to make this something special, how they wanted to use modern video game conventions to make an awesome game, but also make a massive love letter to fans of the original Splatterhouse. Like, they were really trying to hype up the game. They really were. Well, all the good intentions of the world didn't stop this game from being a steaming pile of shit. So let's take a look. The story is simple and complicated at the same time. The basic premise of it is pretty simple. Guy and girl walk into a creepy manor. Girl gets kidnapped by mad scientist inside the creepy manor. Guy has to save girl from mad scientist. However, along the way, they introduce some complexities to the plot that I'm not sure whether they work or not. For example, there are audio logs scattered throughout the game that basically give you some insight as to why the mad scientist is doing what he's doing. These are actually pretty cool since they give you some backstory on the scientist without shoving some cutscenes down your throat. However, this game is still riddled with cutscenes, and it's either one of three things. It's either the mad scientist dragging your girlfriend along just to show that he still has her, some cryptic backstory on the scientist shoved down your throat because you know that's not what the audio logs were for or anything, or a really awesome boss introduction. It honestly just feels like an unfocused mess, especially considering that half the cutscenes are literally just watching the scientist drag your girlfriend along. But it honestly wouldn't bother me so much if it actually showed that it wanted to do more with the plot. Instead, half the time it feels like it's trying to actively hold itself back from being too complicated by just showing the scientist dragging the girlfriend around and just having you beat the crap out of things all the time. It feels like it's trying to be simple, but also trying to be complicated. But it's not trying to show you that it's trying to be complicated. It just kinda hints at it most of the game. So it just leads to a whole bunch of frustrating foreshadowing, which just gets you more and more frustrated. But here's the point of all of this. If you're going to have a complicated plot, that's fine. That doesn't bother me. Any game, whatever, you can have a complicated plot. That doesn't bother me. Do whatever the f you want. But a plot is only as good as the characters involved in it. And let me tell you, the characters in this game are boring as shit. If I have to sit through your weak-ass attempt at a plot, at least have the decency to give me some interesting goddamn characters. Because so far, we have a cardboard cutout of the protagonist with no distinguishable characteristics, a cardboard cutout of the damsel in distress who can't do anything for herself, and a cardboard cutout of a mad scientist who tries way too hard to be deep and complex, and instead only comes off as completely inconsistent. As much as I'm harping on the characters though, there's still one redeemable character in this mess of a plot. And that's the Terror Mask, as voiced by Jim Cummings.
Wait! I know this guy! Yeah, we are screwed.
The Terror Mask is single-handedly the most interesting character in the entire game. And I'm honestly not sure if it's on its own merits, or if it's because the other characters are so bland by comparison. Either way, the entire game could have been about the Terror Mask playing with action figures and narrating it, and it would have achieved the same effect. That is honestly how boring the other characters are. Mr. Cummings, thank you for your time. Will you please give us some encouraging words in regards to how you landed this role?
I ain't your mama, asshole.
Oh man, no need to be such an asshole about it. There's one exchange between Rick and the Terror Mask that I actually really like. If only because it comes off as really meta and sounds like the Terror Mask is addressing the player themselves. It's the only one of its kind in this game, and it's pretty easy to read into.
I can see the real you.
So what is it you think I really am?
Killer.
No, I'm doing this for Jen.
Oh, come on. It's not just what you do, it's who you are. You've always been a killer. In another life. In another game. You've always known it. Felt that urge? You just tried to bury it. You've been wearing a mask your whole life. It's time to embrace it. This is who you really are.
I don't know exactly what it is about this exchange that I like so much, but I think it cemented it in my head that the Terramask really is the most interesting character in this game. Ultimately though, the Terramask is just a vehicle for the gameplay, so let's take a look at that.
Ooh, Dr. West, it's so big.
Do you ever stop talking?
For the most part, the gameplay is actually pretty solid. And when the game sticks to being a 3D style beat 'em up, it just feels amazing to beat the crap out of enemies. The main goal in every beat 'em up is to create a combat system that feels like you're a force to be reckoned with. To make you feel like you can walk down a street and beat the crap out of everyone with brutal efficiency. For the most part, Splatterhouse is pretty good at making you feel like that, by making your character a ridiculous tank that regenerates health and can even pick up weapons that include his own dismembered limbs. Seriously, I'm not kidding, he can pick up his own dismembered limbs. If that doesn't make you feel like a badass, then I don't even know what to do with you. There's even an upgrade system that increases your abilities by giving you more health, more attack options, etc, etc. And you buy upgrades using literal gallons of blood. However, while the game is fun as a 3D style beat 'em up, the problems come when it tries to be the original Splatterhouse. As much as people enjoyed the original Splatterhouse games, they really were a product of their time as far as gameplay was concerned. The controls were really simple and stiff, the jumping was just atrocious. It wasn't anything special as far as a beat 'em up in the 80s went, but you would think that since they're making a new Splatterhouse, that they would take this chance to make the gameplay better, to improve on the foundations of the old games, and make something that's both recognizable as a Splatterhouse game and new and refreshing and fun. And they did do that. They did that with the 3D beat 'em up segments. The problem is that's only half the game. Okay, it's not half the game, but the game is riddled with 2D segments that are supposed to be mimicking the original gameplay of the original Splatterhouse. These segments basically just change the perspective, and you just walk around and wail on enemies as you would in the original game. The gameplay is as similar as they could make it, the only difference basically being in the fact that the environment and the models are 3D, but the perspective and controls are in 2D. However, like I mentioned earlier, the original gameplay for Splatterhouse was actually nothing special. And instead of sticking to a remastered version of the original Splatterhouse's gameplay, aka the 3D beat 'em up segments, they instead opted to do this, complete with bugs, stiff controls, and just... it sucks, man! It sucks! There are death pits all over the place, there's a dashing function that only works for about 2 seconds, the jumping controls are so damn stiff because the game was built as a 3D beat 'em up, and jumping doesn't really work that well in a 3D beat 'em up. Just why? This was good! The 3D beat 'em up gameplay is good! It's fun! It's satisfying! It's gratuitous! Why the hell are you taking a shit all over that by making 2D segments that are just as broken and simple and unfun as the original? This isn't 1988! This is 2010! Make a game that you could conceivably believe was made in 2010! That's not even the worst part. I haven't even mentioned the loading screens. I mean, the game already is riddled with enough bugs in the 2D segments that it would just completely turn anyone off to it. But the loading screens? Oh. Oh, man. Every time you die, there's a loading screen. Given how buggy the 2D segments are, you're going to die a lot. The loading screens take half a minute, and while they're not terribly frequent, they're frequent enough that it makes me want to strangle myself. No matter where you are in the stage, the loading screen takes the same amount of time. There have been instances where the loading screens have been longer than the boss fights after it. It is absolutely ridiculous, and it breaks the flow of the game. And the closest comparison I can make as far as the loading screens go is Sonic 06. If I'm comparing you to Sonic 06, you need to reevaluate your life decisions. It creates a really odd dissonance in the gameplay, where you get scared of dying for reasons that the game designers didn't actually intend. When you die in a video game, you want to be able to get right back to it, to immediately try again and see if you do better this time. However, when the loading screens are this bad, it's not a matter of wanting to try again. It's a matter of wanting to avoid the loading screens. And just like that, the game stops being fun.
The game turns into a chore because you're too busy waiting. When you're stuck waiting, the flow of the game dies. When the flow of the game dies, it's not fun anymore. And when the game's not fun anymore, then why are you even playing?
As much as I'm harping on the gameplay, there really are things about it that I do like. I think the 3D beat-em-up segments are really good, the boss fights are fantastic, there are these like finishing moves that you can execute in the game that just look absolutely amazing and feel great to execute. Not to mention, you have this super mode that you can go into where you can basically just wreck all the enemies' days. But it doesn't excuse the really long load times, nor does it excuse the sloppy execution of the 2D segments. It's good. It really is good, but no.
Burning hatred for the loading screens aside, the game does do a good job of making everything look like a creepy gore fest. The graphics themselves are kind of lackluster, but the game still knows how to present itself in a very stylized way that makes it look all creepy and dark and bloody. There are some times when the game has a very tense ambience to it, where the music changes to a very slow-paced theme and there are no enemies, and the environment is the only thing that's needed to make you tense. For the most part though, this game knows what it wants to be, and what it wants to be is a creepy gore fest. The game is at its best when it has monsters all over the place, blood and guts being splattered everywhere, with the protagonist ripping all the enemies apart, and the stylized art direction making all the blood pop out. The game even has a very heavy metal soundtrack, with some heavy metal inspired tracks to fight the monsters, and even some licensed heavy metal tracks for the boss themes. The soundtrack is actually really good, but it is completely dependent on how much you like heavy metal. Ultimately, the presentation is one of the stronger parts of this game, especially given the soundtrack and the art direction was actually enough to make me forgive the lackluster graphics. There is one thing about the presentation that I don't like though, and I'll freely admit that this is more a subjective thing, and that other people could maybe consider this a plus, I don't know. But along with the audio files that you can collect on Dr. West, there is another collectible that you can collect along the way. Outright naked pictures of the main character's girlfriend. I understand that this is tailored to a certain demographic, and I'll fully acknowledge that I'm probably not part of that demographic. But collecting naked pictures of a video game character doesn't really encourage me to keep playing the game. It just creeps me out that the developers even went for the lowest common denominator as far as making their game appealing to the masses. It feels like this game was made for, like, drunk frat boys or something. I don't know. It feels like a joke, and I'm kind of ashamed to be playing it. At least the game is properly rated M for mature, so it's not like this will come as a surprise to anyone. But anyway, let's move on to the endgame.
Oh, that's great. After we get back to the zombie pounding.
So you've been chasing Dr. West, jumping from portal to portal, and dragging your merry ass around the space-time continuum. I guess it's time to finally put an end to all this and save your girlfriend, right? Wrong! We need some more backstory on Dr. West first! And what better reveal than to show that Dr. West's fiancée died at your hands during your time travel shenanigans? Wait, what? Apparently Dr. West's deceased fiancée looks exactly like the main character's girlfriend. So much so that while time traveling, the main character confused Dr. West's fiancée for his girlfriend and tried to save her. Unfortunately, his attempts to save her led to her becoming a monster. As such, he had to put her down while a young Dr. West ended up watching. In other words, the main character is responsible for Dr. West going mad. Which seems kind of stupidly complicated for a game that's trying so hard to keep it simple, but okay. Either way, this is the reason why he kidnapped your girlfriend. To resurrect his dead fiancée and put her soul inside your girlfriend's body. To this end, he summoned the Corrupted, which might as well be Lovecraftian horror conglomerate number 572. All you really need to know about the Corrupted is that they're the ones responsible for making all the zombies in the game. And that this entire time, the Terror Mask has had some sort of revenge boner against the Corrupted, and his entire point in the plot was just to get some vengeance. For what?
Hell if I know, but apparently the Terror Mask really doesn't like the corrupted. Not that it even matters that much, given that at the end of the game, after all the amazing boss fights you've been through, after all the fantastic fighting segments, all you do is fight 3 static waves of enemies and then beat the final boss with a quick time event. No epic build-up, no grand resolution, no nothing. This giant boss made out of dead corpses shows up, sends 3 waves of enemies at you, you beat him, and you go through a cutscene where the giant pile of dead bodies basically explodes, then the guy and the girl hug and it's over. There's not even any resolution with Dr. West, you just kind of accidentally rip off his arm and then he gets sidelined. Oh, and the game even had the balls to sequel bait, by showing the main character's girlfriend actually getting possessed by a spirit. So the idea is, you know, that spirit is going to be the antagonist for the next game. Not that the next game is ever going to see the light of day, because this was complete and total ass! While the rest of the game had its flaws, it could be salvageable. The gameplay is fun, barring any bugs. The presentation is really solid. The story tries way too hard to be simple and complicated at the same time, but you can just ignore it. I mean, the boss fights are great, just there are a lot of things about this game that are good. But this endgame might actually be the worst endgame I've ever seen in a video game. This feels completely half-assed. This feels like it was pulled out of someone's ass. This feels incomplete. This feels like they rushed it for the sake of putting the game on store shelves. And this makes the game suffer the most. Nothing about this was fun. Nothing about this resolved the plot that it was trying so hard to present. It was just bad. This is just bad. Nothing about this game felt fulfilling after watching that ending. And it's a real shame because fans of the original Splatterhouse deserve better.
Rick, darling. It's good to be back.
Now you do get some extra goodies once you beat the game. Like for example, if you collected the audio files and the pictures of the main character's girlfriend, you get to keep those and look back at them. But there's also different masks that you can use to play through the game. There's the original Splatterhouse games, which you can unlock as you progress through the campaign. There's probably different game modes and stuff like that, but honestly, I didn't play them. I didn't play them because by the time I was done with the game, I never wanted to touch it again. I mean, there's some good stuff about it. Obviously, the gameplay in the 3D segments is really good. The presentation is the strongest aspect of this game. The boss fights are really fun and memorable, and Jim Cummings as the voice of the Terror Mask was the single most amusing thing in this entire game. However, from a technical standpoint, the loading screens are absolutely atrocious. The 2D segments are just not fun and really stiff, and they're not fun, they're just not fun. And the endgame, without giving any spoilers away, is a complete joke. But even with all of this, even with all of that, I wasn't sure whether maybe I was being too harsh on this game, or maybe I wasn't being harsh enough. I didn't know whether the good outweighed the bad, or the bad outweighed the good. I wasn't sure. So ultimately it came down to, would I play this game again if I was given the chance? Maybe if I was drunk.
So, hey, you know, if you like the video, maybe you should look at that subscribe button. Or, you know, if you need to watch more videos, you know, you got the annotations up there. And, you know, maybe you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter and stuff, and you can see when videos go up and stuff. So, yeah. Just a suggestion.